Most families ask you for help. Mine handed me a list, typed, 4 bullet points, numbered 1 through 4, sitting on my kitchen table right next to a coffee I never got the chance to drink. My son couldn't look at me when he set it down. My daughter-in-law did the talking. She always does the talking. Number 4 was the one that got me. You will stop seeing Sandra Ruiz, effective immediately. I read that list twice, folded it in half, and slid it into my shirt pocket like it was a grocery receipt. Then I asked if anyone wanted more coffee. Nobody laughed at that later. Especially not my lawyer, who read the exact same list 6 weeks after they did, looked up over the top of his glasses and said one single word. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Welcome back to Dad's Raw Revenge. Get comfortable, because this one takes a little while to unfold the right way. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Hit that like button if you're the quiet type too. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is a good time. Here, let me back up. My name is Walter Carell. Everybody who matters calls me Walt. I'm 64 years old. I've got a bad left knee from 31 years of standing on concrete floors, and I own a small engine and machine shop on Route 9 outside of Danbury, Ohio, called Carell Engine and Machine. My father started it in 1968, with 2 lathes and a loan from a man he met at church. I took it over in 1987, and I've run it every day since, minus the 4 days I took off when my wife Eleanor died. I am not a dramatic man. I want to say that plainly, right up front, because everything that happened afterward only makes sense if you understand that about me. I don't raise my voice. I don't slam doors. When I'm angry, I get quieter, not louder, and most people who know me well learn to be a little nervous about that instead of shouting. My father was the same way. He used to say, "A loud man is telling you he hasn't decided what to do yet. A quiet man already has." I drive a 1969 Ford F100, dark green, that I've been slowly restoring since 2011. It isn't finished. It'll probably never be finished, and that's fine by me, because the finishing was never really the point. Eleanor used to sit on a lawn chair in the garage on Saturday afternoons with a glass of iced tea and watch me work on it, not saying much, just being there. She passed 4 years ago this past March. Ovarian cancer, 11 months from diagnosis to the funeral home on Maple Street. I still keep her reading glasses in the truck's glove box. I'm not sentimental about much, but I am about that. I've got 2 grown kids. My son Derek is 37. He manages a used car dealership 2 towns over, and he married a woman named Kimberly 9 years ago. Sharp as a tack, sharper elbows. My daughter Paige is 34, works in medical billing, married to a decent quiet man named Chad, and they've got a little girl, my granddaughter Lily, who is 8 years old, and the only person on this earth who can still make me laugh out loud in public. I tell you all this not to make myself sound like a saint. I'm not one. I raised my kids the way my father raised me. Work hard, keep your word, don't ask for what you haven't earned. I thought I'd done a decent job of it. For a long time I believed that. This is the story of the 11 weeks that made me start to wonder, and the one afternoon that proved me right about everything, just not in the way I expected. Now let me tell you about the good part first, because there was a good part, and it's important you understand what I actually had before I tell you how close I came to losing it. About 2.5 years after Eleanor passed, I met a woman named Sandra Ruiz at, of all places, the hardware store on 9th Street. She was standing in the paint aisle holding 2 nearly identical shades of blue, looking like she wanted to throw both cans through the window. I made some dumb joke about how the difference between coastal mist and harbor fog was really just marketing, and she laughed the kind of laugh that catches you off guard. Sandra is 59, a retired elementary school teacher, widowed herself, with a laugh that fills up a room, and a way of looking at you like she's already decided you're worth her time before you've said anything worth hearing. We started having coffee on Wednesdays. Then it was dinner on Fridays. By the 2nd year, she had a drawer at my place, and I had a toothbrush at hers, and neither one of us felt any hurry to make it more official than that. We were 2 people in our 60s who'd already buried a spouse each. We knew what mattered and what didn't. Lily loved her from the first afternoon. Sandra used to be a 2nd-grade teacher for 26 years, so she knew exactly how to talk to an 8-year-old about dinosaurs and horses and why the sky is blue. And Lily started calling her Miss Sandy without anybody suggesting it. On Sunday afternoons, the 4 of us, me, Sandra, Paige and Chad, and Lily, would end up at my place, and Derek and Kimberly would come by sometimes too, when it suited them. I'd grill something on the back porch, Sandra would bring a pie, Lily would run around the yard chasing our old beagle, Duke, and for a while there, life felt about as good as it's got any right to feel for a widower pushing 62. I remember one Sunday in particular, the last weekend of that good stretch, though I didn't know it was the last one at the time. Sandra had made a peach cobbler, Lily had gotten it into her head that Duke needed a bandana, so she'd tied one of Eleanor's old kitchen towels around the poor dog's neck, and he wore it the whole afternoon like he'd earned it. Derek and Kimberly showed up around 4, later than everybody else, and Derek seemed distracted, checking his phone twice during dinner, which wasn't like him. When I asked if everything was all right at the dealership, he said, "Fine, Dad, just a lot going on," and Kimberly changed the subject to whether I'd thought any more about getting some of the estate stuff cleaned up, now that you're, settled with somebody new. I told her there was nothing that needed cleaning up, and she smiled the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, and let it go. I didn't think much of it that evening. I should have. Looking back, that was the first stone landing before the slide started. There's one more piece of that season I should mention now, even though nobody in my family knew about it at the time, because it matters a great deal to how the rest of this story goes. Back in the spring after Eleanor's first anniversary passed, I drove out to see an old friend of mine, a lawyer named Frank Delgado, who'd handled our house closing back in 1991 and had done my will after that. I told Frank I wanted to set something up for Lily, an irrevocable trust, funded partly with proceeds from a piece of land Eleanor and I had owned outside of town, to cover her education and, if it ever came to it, medical needs, administered independently of anybody's day-to-day control, including mine. Frank asked why irrevocable. Why not just leave it in the will like a normal person? I told him because a will can be changed with pressure, and a trust like this one couldn't. Not by me, and not by anybody leaning on me either. Frank looked at me for a long moment and said, "You planning on somebody leaning on you, Walt?" And I said, "No, not yet, I just liked things buttoned up tight." He drew the papers. I signed them in April. Nobody else knew, and I want you to hold on to that fact, because it's going to matter a great deal later. That was the life I had. Ordinary, quiet, mine. Then Derek's dealership started losing money, and everything started to shift. It happened slowly enough that I almost missed it, the way you almost miss the tide going out until you look down, and your feet are standing on dry sand that used to be underwater. Derek had gone into the Smart Value Auto franchise 2 years back, with a partner named Ron Baskin, put in money he didn't fully have, using a loan I'd co-signed against my better judgment, because he was my son, and he asked me with tears, actually standing in his eyes at my kitchen table. By that spring, the lot was carrying 80-some cars nobody wanted, and Ron Baskin had quietly walked away from the partnership, leaving Derek holding a note for $214,000 and a business he didn't know how to save. I found this out not from Derek, but from Paige, who called me on a Tuesday night sounding worried, in a way she usually wasn't. "Dad," she said, "I think Derek's in trouble. Real trouble. Kimberly's been asking me weird questions about your will." I didn't think much of it that night. People ask weird questions when they're scared. I told Paige I'd talk to her brother, and I did, 3 days later, over lunch at the diner on Route 9 he used to like as a kid. He wouldn't look at me the whole meal. He picked at a club sandwich and told me the dealership was going through a rough patch, and when I asked him straight out how bad, he finally said the number, $214,000. I sat there with my coffee going cold and told him we'd figure something out, together, the way a father should. He nodded and thanked me, and didn't say another word about a plan. The plan showed up 9 days later, and it wasn't the kind I'd offered. It was a Thursday, the 11th of April, 7:42 in the evening. I remember the time because I'd just turned off the ball game to answer the door. Derek and Kimberly were standing on my porch, and Kimberly was holding a manila folder against her chest like a shield. They came in, sat down at my kitchen table without much small talk, and Kimberly slid the folder across to me before Derek had even taken his jacket off. Inside was one page, typed 12-point font, 4 numbered items like something you'd hand a contractor. 1. Walter agrees to co-sign a new business loan of $180,000 to stabilize Smart Value Auto, secured against the Route 9 property. 2. Walter will update his will to name Derek as sole executor, replacing the current arrangement, for efficiency, given Dad's age. 3. Walter will place Kimberly on the shop's payroll in an advisory capacity at $3,200 a month. 4. Walter will stop seeing Sandra Ruiz immediately, as her presence is creating complications for the family's financial planning. I read it twice. Nobody said anything while I did. Derek was staring at the salt shaker like it owed him money. Kimberly was watching my face the way you watch a scale you're hoping tips your direction. Dad, Derek finally said, I know how this looks, but you'll thank us later. This is us, trying to protect the family. There it was, his signature line, though I didn't know yet how many more times I'd hear it. You'll thank us later, Dad. I folded the paper in half, slow, the way you'd fold a flag, and put it in my shirt pocket. That's an interesting list, I said. I'll want to think on it. Kimberly's face flickered. She'd expected either an explosion or a signature, and got neither. I offered them coffee. Nobody wanted any. They left a little after 8, and I sat at that kitchen table for a long time after the taillights disappeared down the driveway, not moving, just thinking. I want to be fair here, because that matters to me. I know how these stories usually go. The villain is a monster from page 1, easy to hate, easy to root against. That's not exactly true of my son. Derek was scared. Scared people do ugly things and call them love. I understood that, and for a good while I gave him room for it. I told myself, he's my boy, he's drowning, and drowning men grab whatever's closest, even if it's the person trying to save them. I decided I'd give him a real chance to come to me honestly, before I decided what any of this meant. He didn't take it. Instead, things got worse. It actually started a little before that diner lunch, if I'm honest with myself now. Back in February, Derek had called me on a Sunday night asking to borrow $15,000 to cover a payroll gap, promising it back within a month. I gave it to him without hesitation, wired it Monday morning before the shop even opened, because that's what fathers do. The month came and went. No mention of it. I didn't bring it up either, figuring he'd get to it when he could. Now I understood that $15,000 had just been the first small brick pulled out of a much bigger wall, and he'd known it even then, and hadn't told me. Over the next 3 weeks, it stopped being subtle. Kimberly started showing up at the shop on slow Tuesday afternoons. The first time, she brought me a coffee from the place on 9th Street, sat across from my desk in the little office at the back that still has my father's old calendar from 1994 tacked to the wall, and made pleasant conversation for about 6 minutes before she got to it. Have you ever thought about what happens to all this? She said, waving a hand at the shop floor through the window. If something happened to you suddenly, I just think about it, that's all. Derek would want to keep it running exactly how you'd want, but he'd need to know how things work, the accounts, the vendor relationships, all of it. I told her the shop wasn't going anywhere, and neither was I, and thanked her for the coffee. She came back twice more over the following 2 weeks, each time a little less patient, asking my longtime bookkeeper, Marcy, pointed little questions about how things were structured going forward whenever I stepped out to the floor. Derek stopped coming to Sunday dinners entirely, and when he did call, it was always about the loan, never just to talk. Paige told me, quietly, over coffee at her place with Lily doing homework at the counter, that Kimberly had asked her, casually and like it was nothing, whether Paige thought Dad was still sharp, day to day. Paige said she'd laughed it off at the time. She wasn't laughing when she told me. Derek called me 2 nights after that, close to 10 o'clock, his voice tight and fast in a way I recognized from when he was 17 and had put a dent in my truck he hadn't told me about for a week. He wanted an answer on the loan by Friday, he said. The bank was breathing down his neck, and when I told him I needed more time to think it through properly, he got quiet for a second, and then said it again. Dad, just sign it. You'll thank us later, I promise you. I told him I loved him and hung up gently, no bite in it at all, and sat in my recliner in the dark for a long while afterward, turning that sentence over in my head like a stone with a sharp edge I couldn't quite place yet. Then came the night that changed everything, though I didn't know it yet. I'd left my reading glasses at Derek's house after dropping off some paperwork for the loan discussion. I still hadn't signed anything. I want to be clear. I was stalling, watching, waiting to see how far this would go, and I drove back over around 9 to grab them. Their front door was unlocked, the way it always was, and I let myself in quiet, the way you do in your own son's house. I could hear Kimberly's voice from the kitchen before I saw her, on the phone, not bothering to keep it down because she didn't know I was standing in the hallway with my hand still on the doorknob. The doctor just needs to say he's showing signs of decline. That's all it takes to start the guardianship paperwork. Derek looked it up. It doesn't even need to be true. It just needs to be plausible enough to get a hearing date. I stood there in that hallway for what felt like a very long time, though it was probably closer to 15 seconds. Then I walked back out, quiet as I'd come in, drove home in the dark without the radio on, and sat in my driveway for another 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. My own son, trying to get a doctor to say I was losing my mind, so a judge would hand him control of everything I'd spent 40 years building, so he could pay off a debt he'd made himself. Not because I'd ever given him one single reason to think I couldn't run my own life. Because it was convenient. Because I was, in his eyes, harmless. Predictable. A man who'd fold the paper in half and think about it. That should have been the worst of it. It wasn't not quite. 2 nights later, Kimberly called Sandra directly, something I only learnt about afterward, and told her, in Sandra's words, very sweetly, like she was doing me a favor, that it might be better for everyone, Walt included, if Sandra took a step back for a while the family sorted some things out. Sandra didn't tell me right away. She didn't want to add fuel to something she could see was already building. That's the kind of woman she is. I didn't explode. I want you to understand that, because it would have been easy, and it would have felt good for about 4 minutes, and it would have handed Derek and Kimberly exactly the story they needed. Dad's losing it. Dad's unstable. See, this is why we're worried. So I did the opposite. I got quiet. Quieter than I'd been in years. I went to work every morning at 6:15 like always, rebuilt a transmission for a farmer named Otto Krieger, closed up the shop at 5:30, came home, fed Duke, and didn't say one word to Derek or Kimberly about what I'd overheard. I told Sandra everything that same week, sitting on the back porch with Duke asleep between our chairs. She didn't say much while I talked, just reached over and held my hand the way she does when she wants you to know she's not going anywhere. When I finished, she said, "Walt, I've been teaching 2nd grade for 26 years. I've seen a lot of scared parents do a lot of foolish things in the name of protecting their kids. This isn't that different, except the kid's 37, and it's you he thinks needs protecting from yourself." She was quiet for a second, then added, "You're not going to yell at him, are you?" It wasn't really a question. She already knew the answer. I told her no, I wasn't going to yell at anybody. I was going to make sure nobody in that family ever had to wonder again exactly where they stood, or exactly what I was capable of, when somebody tried to take something from me that wasn't theirs to take. Not yet, I told myself. Not yet. If you've been listening for a while, do us one quick favor. Hit subscribe. It costs you nothing and it means a great deal to us. Go ahead and drop your thoughts in the comments too, I read every one. The next morning, a Tuesday, I called Frank Delgado's office before I'd even finished my coffee and asked if he had time that week. He said Thursday 10 o'clock. I told him I'd be there. I want to walk you through what I did over those next few weeks, because none of it was loud and none of it was fast, and that's exactly the point. I'm not an angry man by nature. What I am, and what I became very deliberately during that stretch, is accurate. I'm not angry, I'm just accurate. I said that phrase to myself more times than I can count, usually somewhere around 5 a.m., lying awake next to Sandra, working through what came next in my head like I used to work through a stubborn engine problem, piece by piece, no guessing, no shortcuts. Thursday morning, I sat across from Frank in his office on Chestnut Street, the same office where I'd signed Lily's trust papers 2 years earlier, and I told him everything. The list of 4 demands, the bit of conversation I'd overheard through Kimberly's kitchen doorway, the call to Sandra. Frank listened without interrupting, which is one of the reasons I've trusted him for 30 years, and when I finished he took his glasses off, cleaned them on his shirt and said, "Walt, I want to be very clear with you about something. What you overheard, that's not just bad behavior. Depending on what they actually file, that could be the beginning of an attempt at elder guardianship fraud. That's serious. That's a felony in this state if it goes far enough." I told him I didn't necessarily want to destroy my son. I wanted to protect what was mine, protect Lily's trust, protect Sandra, and make sure Derek understood, in a way he couldn't misunderstand or talk his way around, that this particular door was closed and locked. Frank nodded slowly, the way he does when he's already 3 moves ahead. "Then let's build you a very quiet, very complete answer, he said. Not a war, a closed door. Here's what we did, and I'll lay it out plainly, because there's nothing to hide about any of it. First, Frank had me go see Dr. Priya Anand, my longtime physician of 19 years, for a full cognitive evaluation. Not because anyone had a right to demand it, but because I wanted on paper, dated and notarized, a clean bill of mental health that would make any future guardianship filing collapse the moment a judge looked at it. Dr. Anand ran me through 2.5 hours of testing on a Monday afternoon. I scored, in her words, better than most 40-year-olds I test. She laughed when she said it. I didn't, not yet, but I kept that report. Second, Frank pulled the original trust documents for Lily's education and medical fund, the ones I'd signed 3 years back, quietly, with nobody else knowing, and confirmed in writing that they were irrevocable, that I had no power to unwind them even if someone pressured me into trying, and that the co-trustee alongside Frank's firm, added at my request that same week, was Sandra Ruiz. Not Derek, not Kimberly, Sandra. I'd never told Sandra that either, not directly, not in those words. I'd only told her, a while back, that I'd set something up for Lily, don't worry about it. She had no idea how deep it went until the day it mattered. Third, and this part took longer, about 2.5 weeks, Frank helped me quietly reach out to a private financial consultant he trusted, a woman named Ruth Okafor, who specialized in small business turnarounds, not to bail Derek out. To find out exactly how deep the Smart Value auto hole actually went, and whether it could be saved at all, because I still, even then, hadn't given up entirely on the idea of helping my son the honest way, if there was an honest way left to take. Ruth's answer came back on a Tuesday afternoon. The dealership was $214,000 in the hole, yes, but it was also carrying $61,000 in inventory that had been quietly listed as collateral on a second, separate loan Derek had taken out without telling Kimberly, 6 months earlier, from a private lender at 11% interest, apparently to cover a shortfall he hadn't wanted his wife to know about. Ruth called me herself to walk through it, her voice careful and professional over the phone. "Mr. Carell," she said, "I want to be straight with you. Your son isn't a criminal. He's a man who made one bad loan decision, then another to cover the first, then panicked. I see this more than you'd think in businesses this size. What worries me isn't the math. The math is fixable. What worries me is that nobody in his life seems to know the real numbers except you, and now me." I thanked her, hung up, and sat with her for a long while. My son had secrets from his own wife. That told me something too, that this whole thing wasn't a united front so much as two scared, desperate people improvising in different directions and hoping I wouldn't notice the seams. Fourth, I called Marcy, my bookkeeper, and asked her, gently, whether Kimberly had asked her anything unusual lately. Marcy hesitated, then told me Kimberly had asked, twice, whether the shop's ownership structure would automatically pass to Derek if anything happened to me, and whether there was a faster way to get him added to the business accounts. I asked Marcy to keep a plain, dated log of any future conversations like that. She agreed without asking why. Good people do that for you when you've earned it over 22 years. Fifth, and this was Sandra's idea, not mine, she quietly saved every text Kimberly had sent her since that phone call. 6 messages in total, dated between April 14th and April 22nd, including one that read, word for word, "This isn't personal. I just think it's smarter for everyone if you take some space for a while, Walt included." Sandra hadn't responded to a single one. She'd just screenshotted them, dated a folder on her laptop, and waited, same as I was waiting, because she'd figured out on her own that whatever this was building toward, it would help to have receipts. I also drove out to Otto Krieger's farm one evening that same week, not for any engine work, just to sit on his porch with a beer and talk it through out loud to somebody who had no stake in any of it. Otto's known me since we were boys. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting, the way he does, and when I finished he said, "Walt, you've spent 40 years fixing what other men broke, and never once asking for credit. Don't let your own son be the one thing you don't bother fixing right." I drove home thinking about that the rest of the night. It's part of why I never once, through any of this, wanted Derek destroyed. I wanted him stopped, and I wanted him honest, and those aren't the same thing as wanting him ruined. By the first week of May, I had a complete picture. I had a clean bill of mental health with a date on it that predated any move they might make. I had an ironclad, unbreakable trust protecting Lily with Sandra as co-trustee. I had documentation of the exact shape of Derek's real financial trouble, separate from the story I'd been fed. And I had Marcy's dated notes describing exactly the kind of efficiency planning Kimberly had been quietly attempting behind my back. Frank looked at all of it laid out across his conference table on a Friday afternoon and said, "Walt, you didn't build a defense. You built a door nobody in that family can get through, no matter which way they push on it." I asked him one more thing before I left that day. I asked him to set up a meeting, all of us together, Derek and Kimberly and Paige and Chad, at his office, for the following Thursday, to discuss the family's financial planning going forward, in exactly those words, the words Kimberly herself had used in that list of demands sitting folded in my shirt drawer at home. I wanted them walking into that room thinking they'd finally worn me down. Second quick word before we go on. If this story's got you hooked, the like button helps more than you'd think. Thursday came. 2:15 in the afternoon, Frank's conference room on Chestnut Street, the same room where I'd signed Lily's trust papers under a framed print of a lighthouse that's hung on that wall as long as I've been coming here. Derek arrived first, in a suit he doesn't usually wear, hopeful in a way that made my chest hurt a little, if I'm honest. Kimberly came in 2 minutes later carrying that same manila folder, or one just like it, holding it against her chest the way she had that night in my kitchen. Paige and Chad came in last, Paige giving me a look across the room that told me she still didn't fully know what was about to happen, and that she was nervous about it either way. The lighthouse print on the wall hadn't moved an inch since the day I'd signed Lily's trust papers under it. Frank had a manila folder of his own in front of him now, thicker than Kimberly's, though he didn't open it right away. He let everyone settle, offered water nobody wanted, and gave Derek a nod that was almost kind, which I appreciated, because whatever else was about to happen in that room, Frank understood as well as I did that my son wasn't walking in as a villain in his own mind. He was walking in as a scared man who still believed, right up until the moment he didn't, that he'd found the responsible way through. Frank opened with pleasantries, the way lawyers do, and then he laid Kimberly's list of demands, the actual paper, the one from my kitchen table 6 weeks earlier, which I'd given him a copy of, flat on the table in front of everyone. "I understand," Frank said, calm as still water, that this document was presented to Walter on the evening of April 11th as a set of conditions for continued family support. I've reviewed it. I've also reviewed some related matters that came to light since. I'd like to walk through it, item by item, if everyone's agreeable. Kimberly's chin lifted a fraction. Derek nodded, still hopeful, still thinking this was the meeting where his father finally caved. Item 1, Frank said, a co-signed loan of $180,000 against the Route 9 property. I'll note for the record that the Route 9 property, along with the business operating on it, was placed into an irrevocable trust 3 years ago. Walter has no legal authority to encumber it further, even if he wished to, so that item is, as of today, moot. Derek's face didn't move yet. Kimberly did, just slightly, the corner of her mouth flattening. Item 2, Frank went on, naming Derek as sole executor, replacing the current arrangement for efficiency, given Walter's age. I'd like to enter into the record a full cognitive evaluation completed by Dr. Priya Anand on April 29th, which found Walter's faculties to be, and I'm quoting directly, above average for any age bracket tested. I'd also like to note, for anyone in this room who may have discussed pursuing a guardianship filing on different grounds, and here Frank looked, just briefly, directly at Kimberly, that Ohio law treats a fraudulent guardianship petition, one filed on grounds known to be false, as a criminal matter, not a civil one. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Kimberly's face had gone the color of old paper. Derek turned and looked at her, really looked at her, like he was seeing something for the first time. "Kimberly," he said, low. "What does he mean, filing?" She didn't answer him. I watched my son's whole understanding of the last 6 weeks rearrange itself in real time across his face, and I felt something in my chest that wasn't triumph. Not exactly. It was closer to grief. Item 3, Frank continued, unhurried, placing Kimberly on payroll at Coral Engine and Machine in an advisory capacity. I'll simply note that this is Walter's business, solely owned, and the decision remains entirely his. He turned to me. This was the part I'd asked him to let me do myself. And item 4, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected it to. That, I will stop seeing Sandra Ruiz. I looked at Kimberly directly for the first time all afternoon. You called her, you know. Told her to step back, for everyone's sake, including mine. I want you to know that Sandra didn't step back. She's been Lily's co-trustee for 3 years. She'll keep managing part of Lily's education fund, whether you and I are on speaking terms or not, Kimberly, because that decision was never yours to weigh in on. It was mine, and I made it a long time before that list ever landed on my kitchen table. Derek said quietly, "Dad, you'll thank us later." That's what I said. I really believed that. I know you did, I told him, and I meant it. That's the part I keep coming back to. You believed scaring me into a corner was protecting the family. But you never once, in 6 weeks, just told me the truth and asked for help honestly. You had it, Derek, the whole time. I would have found a way. Instead, you had your wife hunting for a doctor willing to say I was losing my mind. So a judge would hand you the keys instead of me just handing them to you, which I would have done, if you'd only asked. Frank set one more piece of paper on the table. Ruth Okafor's financial review, the real shape of the dealership's trouble, including the second loan Derek had taken out without telling his own wife. Kimberly's head turned toward him sharply at that. Apparently that particular secret hadn't made it into their united front either. 11%, Derek, she said, and it was the first thing she'd said in almost 10 minutes. From who? Doesn't matter now, he said, quiet, not looking at her. It matters to me, she said, and for just a second I saw something in her face that looked almost like the woman I remembered from their wedding, 9 years back, before all of this. Someone who'd married a man she thought she knew completely, finding out in a conference room, same as me, that she hadn't known him completely at all. I felt for her in that moment more than I expected to. Frank let the silence sit for a while before he spoke again, because some silences do more work than words. Nobody said much after that. Paige was crying quietly, not for Derek exactly, more for the whole shape of what the last 6 weeks had actually been, once you could finally see it laid out flat on a conference table, under a framed lighthouse print. Chad had a hand on her shoulder. Derek stared at the table like it might tell him what to say next. It didn't. Frank folded his hands and looked around the room one last time. So, he said, regarding the 4 items on this list. He picked the paper up, looked at it once more, set it back down, and said the word I'd been waiting 6 weeks to hear him say. Denied. That was it. One word. Not shouted, not even particularly loud. Just final. The way a door sounds when it clicks shut instead of slams, which is somehow always louder in the end. I'm at peace with how it turned out, mostly. Derek and I talk now, slowly, carefully, the way you rebuild a bridge one board at a time after a flood took most of it out. He and Kimberly separated about 4 months after that meeting. I don't know everything that happened between them, and I've made a point of not asking. He sold his half of Smart Value Auto, paid down what he could, and he's working as a service manager at a Chevrolet dealership 2 counties over now, punching a clock like the rest of us, which suits him better than he'd ever admit out loud. Paige and I are closer than we've been in years. Lily still calls Sandra Miss Sandy, and last month, without either of us saying much about it, Sandra started wearing a ring I gave her on a Tuesday evening in my garage, next to the truck, with Eleanor's reading glasses still sitting quietly in the glove box where they belong. I still work 6 days a week at Coral Engine and Machine. I still drive that green 1969 F100, still not finished, probably never will be. Some evenings I sit out in the garage with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, the way Eleanor used to sit with her iced tea, and I think about how close I came to losing all of it. Not to a stranger, not to bad luck, but to my own son, scared and desperate and convinced that quiet meant weak. A few weeks ago, Lily asked me, out of nowhere, while we were sitting on the tailgate of the F100 eating popsicles, why Uncle Derek didn't come to Sunday dinner anymore like he used to. I told her the truth, in the plainest way an 8-year-old could hold on to it, that sometimes grown-ups get scared and make bad choices trying to fix things fast, instead of slow and honest, and that Uncle Derek was working on getting better at that now. She thought about it for a second, licked her popsicle, and said, "Well, I hope he figures it out, because Duke misses him." Out of the mouths of babes. I think about that more than I probably should. Some men don't look powerful. They just are. And the people who mistake their patience for surrender always find out eventually, usually at the worst possible moment for them, and the best possible moment for everybody they were trying to protect. If you enjoyed this one, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I'll see you on the next one.